I'm Matthew Arndt, Director of Training for Gloss University.
And I'm David Patterson, the Technical Director for Gloss University.
Today we're going to be doing a technical review for Rotary Polishers.
This is part one of our Learn series, where we are doing probably one of the most comprehensive and in-depth tool reviews featuring all the tools on the market today. 15 years ago, this tool, along with 2 or 3 others, might have been the only polishers available or that were being used on the market. But today, there's a ton more.
Dave, you're right when you said 15 years ago. However, this tool was purchased new by me in '99, and it's been with me a long time. And I really think, kind of in the modern detailing world, we've gotten so many cool tools that we have today. And it's nice to go back and kind of see how a lot of these things got started for us. Polishing, and we're still very effective in the modern world, and I know that there's a lot of confusion sometimes with the movements of tools, so we thought it'd be really helpful to kind of go back to the beginning, how it started for us and how these tools are effective and are still used today.
The Milawuskee Rotary was the first polisher that I had too. This is actually a single speed, runs about what?
1,750 RPMs, no speed control.
No speed control. You can feather the trigger to adjust that, but my tool was the same tool with an adjustable trigger control. So these tools were some of the first rotary tools that were used outside of the old traditional two-handed gem
Correct.
Polishers that you might have seen in the car wash world. And these were widely used in the body shop world for the most part. I would say this Milwaukee polisher, along with the Makita.
The Makita and the Dewalt, or Black & Decker then, I believe.
Yep, were the 3 main grinders or rotary polishers available for use.
Sure. Yeah, and something that's really, as time has gone on, we've watched how tools have actually gotten smaller. And I know back in the day when I was selling these tools to professional technicians, you know, a big complaint of them was specifically the weight. So as tools have kind of evolved, we've seen them get a little bit more smaller and compact. But personally, one of the things I love about this machine is its weight. It's very stable, and it's something that's kind of missed in some of the modern tools that are a little bit lighter, that tend to dance around a little bit more, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. Back when this tool was relevant, they really were compared, for the most part, between the Milwaukee and the Makita, at least in the body shop world that I was in. And the Milwaukee was always a little bit heavier, a little bit louder, maybe a lot more louder.
Yeah.
But it had an instant and featherable trigger, which became pretty useful for me. I was able to adjust the speed really easily. The Makita, on the other hand, was much quieter.
Right, it was much quieter. I think a big thing too, like now with tools, people are always talking about all the other combinations, but what I remember a lot, the questions I used to always get in the field when I would sell these was, what speed do we run? And I always felt like, well, I started with 1,750 RPMs, that's really all that I know, and it's been really cool to see how the tools now, I mean, some of these machines, they have speed controls where you can slow it down to 600 RPMs, I believe, right?
Yeah, or even slower, I believe, on the Rupes. So the Makita always offered a little bit different value, where it was a lot quieter and it was a lot lighter, but it had a soft start trigger.
Correct.
And what is a soft start trigger?
Well, when you set your RPM, and when you pull the trigger, it basically has like a tolerance where it builds up to the speed, essentially.
Correct. So even though it's very loud and heavy, I always chose a Milwaukee, similar to Matt.
Yeah.
But the Makita was actually probably the more premium polisher, I believe, at the time, or for most people, because of the weight itself.
Correct. Right around the time that the Dewalt came out, one of the things that I always remember struggling with at that time was because now we had a speed control, and I remember speed controls failing a lot, right? Mm-hmm. You see on a lot of modern tools, there's always an issue when a tool would break, but I remember having to, in my days in the field, have to take these things apart and replace components, and the way the trigger is integrated into the speed control is not an easy repair.
No. So while this Milwaukee polisher isn't relevant anymore today, pretty much at all, it is relevant in the cordless tool category, and we're going to do a video later on that in part of this Learn series.
So Dave, you touched on something a minute ago about the volume of a machine, and I wanted to talk a little bit on what you think that has to impact the technician using the tool, right? You said the decibels. Yeah. I know certain machines are louder, and I'll tell you right now, my favorite one to use is the Flex. Out of all of these ones here, this one actually is the quietest.
Yep. So obviously loud noises, even though your iWatch can notify you and tell you when it's too loud in the area. A lot of these tests are done by decibels, but at the same time, I think there's an aspect of that that's not taken into context with decibel readings, and I think that's the tone or the pitch. So I believe if I look at numbers correctly, the Rupes might be the lowest decibel reading, but it does run a little bit of a higher pitch. So for me, it does sound a little bit louder, even though it provides a lower decibel reading.
Yeah.
Where Dewalt really kind of advanced their polisher was through design and also the mesh on the side of the intakes to prevent a lot of the wool debris that a lot of these old school body shops were kicking up when they were buffing cars.
Dave, I'm sure if you look inside the Milwaukee, you'll probably still find some wool strands in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Dewalt is still relevant today. They also do have a cordless version, and this is actually a great tool. So between the Milwaukee and the Dewalt, these are both considered full-size body tools. The Dewalt and the newer Milwaukees do go down to a very low RPM, so they're great for all types of work. But I would say the majority of the people that are using full-size Dewalts or Makita or Milwaukee polishers are really doing large boats, large vehicles for the most part.
Yes. We would love to hear from you guys on what tool got you into the industry and maybe what tools you're still using today. You can leave them in the comments below. That'd be really cool. Through this series, you're going to hear us use the word movement. And I wanted to ask you, Dave, what are some of the things that the Rotary does well, specifically based around its movement?
So what I love about a Rotary is being able to maneuver around curves and contours, whether it's a convex or concave panel. Obviously, they do very, very well in concave panels. But I think the advantage of a Rotary polisher is it's like a surgical scalpel. It allows you to precisely polish up to edges and be able to correct very delicate and intricate pieces of paintwork without damaging the edges.
Yeah. And I feel like some of the other tools now are a little on the lighter side. And so if I'm using a Rotary that's lighter and I want to come in with confidence to an edge, sometimes I feel like it likes to dance around. Whereas if I'm using this old boat anchor, I can get right up on the edge and stall it, and I know it's not going to dance around. One of my favorite tools actually using now, as Dave mentioned, with edge work is the Flex. I actually have a little extender here on this one. And this, like Dave was talking about with the edge work, being able to roll it over the drops and the turns, this is actually my favorite tool when I'm doing correction work.
Yeah, and for that reason, they're very nice and versatile, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't include the Festool.
Correct.
The Festool is actually a fantastic polisher, super high quality. It's made in Europe, but because it is mainly sold in Europe, it actually is the only polisher out of this group, or out of the majority of polishers that we're going to talk about, that has European thread pitch that's a little bit different. The Festool has a 14 millimeter thread pitch. You can still find backing plates and extensions for that machine, but they're not as available as you would find them in Europe.
Sure. What's another thing that a Rotary performs very well at?
So I think there's a few things that Rotaries still have a really strong place in correcting paint. And I think one of them is the edge work that we talked about, boxing in panels, being able to do very precise polishing work. The other one is for doing heavy correction. So the heat that's generated from a Rotary is a little bit different than the heat generated from a dual action polisher. And while dual action polishers are kind of the primary tool that a lot of detailers use and are becoming more popular in the body shop, if we're doing a fully wet sanded car or a very heavy correction, we can do very, very heavy cutting for long periods of time with a Rotary paired with a wool pad, and we can keep that paint relatively cool during the process.
Sure.
The other aspect that I think is probably the most beneficial for a Rotary is on some older lacquer and some other finicky paints where they just don't like to polish out with a DA.
Yeah. Probably the two most relevant tools on the market today are the Rupes Rotary and the Flex Rotary as well. And we're going to talk about that a little bit right now.
Yeah, both of these are some of the best tools on the market. They're lighter weight, they're smaller body, and really they're good for the majority of work that detailers are doing today. These are not considered full-size tools, so most of the time, if you're running an 8-inch, 9-inch wool pad, you're going to want to be using a full-size polisher.
Yeah. And these also are the lighter tools, like David mentioned, are also for guys that are doing bigger jobs where you're working on maybe an RV or a boat and you're kind of doing more vertical panels. The heavier machines, doing that for a long day is really going to kind of wear your arms out pretty quick.
Yeah, so let's compare some of the differences between the Flex and the Rupes, because I think these are two of the most common corded tools that are being used in the market.
Sure.
And maybe some of the most popular here. The Flex goes down to 600 RPM, where I believe the Rupes actually goes down to about 450 or a little bit lower. I tend to run my polishers somewhere around 900 to 1100 RPM for most jobs.
Sure.
And I can adjust the speed from the trigger at that point.
Yeah. I actually like to run a little bit faster. It's just the way I learned on the old Milwaukee, about 1750 RPM. So I'm normally running in the range between 1400 and maybe 1800 RPMs. But I think one of the biggest difference, at least for me as from a user standpoint with this tool, is specifically the location of the speed control, right? So you have your trigger on the bottom, and on the Rupes here you have the speed control on the top. Whereas on the Flex, you have the speed control onto the side. These are just little nuances that as you start using the machine, sometimes you forget, sometimes when that tool's in my hand, I'm reaching up on top. But those are just little characteristics that make them a little different from each other.
I've actually always really liked the Flex, even for a small-handed guy, but I will say one of the things that I've always noticed is that the Rupes tends to feel a little bit better in your pistol hand here.
Right.
And where the Flex is a little bit longer, wide, and it can kind of fatigue your hand a little bit over time. I personally love the Flex myself, but I do have both of these machines, and I do think they're great. You can see, compared to the other tools, they don't have handles on these tools, and they
was just going there.
Yeah, they come with them, and they are available to use, but most people are not using them. I think they do add some stability. They get in the way once in a while, but they also add a different dynamic of the dancing or the ability to control that tool at the best level. What I prefer about the Flex is that it has a lower head height. So this actually has an extension on it, which is hard to see. But typically, if you were to have a backing plate directly on here, it actually sits about a half of an inch lower, maybe a little bit more than that. And for me, that adds a little bit more balance. And that helps prevent some of that walking. The thing that I like more about the Rupes is that it has a little bit more of a nose to hold on to. If you do have bigger hands, it's the same about back here. This works really awesome to grab in the front as well. But for me, having smaller hands, the nose on the Rupes is really, really nice.
Yeah. If you guys have any questions about these tools, please leave them in the comments below. If you're looking for a new tool and maybe are a little confused on what might be the right tool for you, we'd love to see your comments in the section below.
These polishers actually cost a little bit more than maybe a Dewalt or a Makita, and typically they might be 40% more, roughly, give or take. They kind of fall in their own category. Each one has their place, and they all get the same job done, right? Yeah,
I mean, essentially that's a great point, because all the tools, even though they are a little different, they have very similar components, and the movement is just a spin action.
Yeah, right? It's a single spinning action, and the one thing that we didn't include is some really entry-level budget polishers. Are you interested in seeing videos about entry-level polishers? Would you like to see us do a review where we do the same type of thing with maybe some Harbor Freight, entry-level machines that are a lot more obtainable for somebody just getting into the hobby? Leave a comment below. Let us know if you'd like to see that.
Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to check out our next series. And if you guys have any questions about polishers, please leave them in the section below.
Part 2 is going to be DA polishers. If you want to find out more about Gloss University trainings, go check out glossuniversity.com. And thank you very much for watching.
Thank you guys. We'll see you on the next video.